Old dog runs to miles through blizzard to save owner. What happened in the end will shock you. The wind carried the bitter sting of Montana winter across the open plains, sweeping over the snow-covered pastures that stretched out from Frank Miller's weathered ranch house. He sat as he always did, bundled in his thick flannel and heavy coat, rocking gently on the front porch with a blanket across his knees and a cup of lukewarm coffee in his hands. His eyes, clouded a bit by age, but still sharp enough to catch movement on the horizon, scanned the landscape that had become both his home and his companion. At his feet, nestled against the faded wooden boards, lay Charlie. Charlie had gone gray around the muzzle, his once vibrant golden coat dulled by the years. His back right leg, stiff from an old injury, twitched now and then in his sleep. Still, when Frank shifted in his rocker or murmured something under his breath, the old retriever's ears perked ever so slightly, as if to say, "I'm here, Frank. Still here. You and me. Ha, boy," Frank said softly, reaching down to scratch behind Charlie's ears. Two old soldiers, waiting on the sun to set. The dog let out a slow, contented sigh. Frank had been a Marine once back, when his bones didn't ache and he didn't need 3 tries to stand up from a chair. He'd served his country, raised a family, buried a wife. Life had marched on, slow and relentless. His 2 kids had moved east New York, maybe Philadelphia. It was hard to keep track. They called sometimes on Christmas or his birthday, when the guilt piled up, but otherwise, it was just Frank and Charlie, and that had been enough. Charlie had come into his life nearly 10 years back, a limping, half-starved stray rescued from a frozen ditch by a local shelter. Frank had gone in looking for something he wasn't sure what exactly, but the moment Charlie's eyes locked with his, something clicked. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the loneliness they both carried. Maybe it was fate. He named him Charlie, after his old drill sergeant, and the two had been side by side ever since. It was mid-December when the accident happened. The sky had been bruised gray for days, and the first real storm of the season had rolled in just after dawn. Snow fell in thick, soundless sheets. The horses in the back barn were restless, sensing the cold coming. Maybe so Frank pulled on his coat and boots, called to Charlie, and trudged out to check on them. The barn wasn't far, maybe a couple 100 yards, but the snow made it slow going. Frank cursed his knees with every step. He was halfway through scooping out feed when his foot caught on a shovel handle buried under straw. The world tilted. Then pain exploded in his hip. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked clean out of him. For a while, he just lay there, eyes fixed on the rafters, too stunned to move. When he tried to shift, pain radiated up his side and into his ribs. "Damn it," he muttered, teeth gritted. The cold crept in fast. His coat was thick, but not thick enough. His gloves had fallen somewhere, and the snow snuck in under his collar. He called out, weak at first, then louder. "Charlie, Charlie, boy." The dog was there in moments, nose pressed against Frank's cheek, tail wagging anxiously. "Go get help," Frank rasped, not really expecting anything. Ain't nobody close by, anyway. He didn't remember falling asleep, only the slow dimming of the barn light and the way Charlie curled up beside him, pressing his warm body against Frank's side. Maybe that was the end, he thought. Not a bad way to go. But Charlie didn't let it end. When Frank's breathing grew shallower, and the cold started stealing even the faint tremble of his fingers, Charlie stood. He whined, sniffed the air, and gave his old friend one last lick on the cheek before turning toward the open barn door. The wind howled. The snow was deep, almost past his chest in some drifts. His bad leg dragged more than it used to, and each step sent a jolt up his side. But he didn't stop. The neighbor's place was almost 2 miles away, across fields and frozen fences. It might as well have been 100. But Charlie ran. He ran through the aching cold, over ice, and beneath the falling snow. He ran with one thing in his heart: Frank needs me. When he reached the neighbor's house, a squat cabin with lights glowing faintly through frosted windows, he barked. Once, then again, then louder, clawing at the door with frozen paws, his chest heaving from the run. Inside, Evelyn Sanders, a widow herself, well into her 70s, opened the door with a start. She recognized Charlie immediately. "Good heavens," she whispered. "Where's Frank?" Charlie barked again, turning and bolting a few feet away, then circling back. "Something's wrong," Evelyn said aloud, grabbing her coat. She called her grandson, who was visiting for the weekend, and the two followed the dog back through the snow-covered fields. They found Frank half buried under a light dusting of snow, his skin pale and his breath shallow. Evelyn called 911 while her grandson wrapped Frank in their coats and lifted him into the truck. Charlie rode in the back seat, never taking his eyes off Frank. At the hospital, they said it was a miracle. A few more hours in the cold, and hypothermia would have taken him. The surgeon talked about pins and plates, about rehab and mobility, but Frank only half listened. It wasn't until the young doctor with kind eyes sat beside him and said, "If you hadn't been found that night, you might have died," that something cracked open in his chest. Charlie had been lying on the hospital floor, tail thumping slowly. Frank leaned over, voice thick with tears. "You saved me, old buddy." He ran his hand down the dog's back. "You didn't give up on me." Charlie just rested his head on Frank's foot, and for a long time, neither of them moved. Frank's recovery was slow, but steady. Neighbors brought meals. The town chipped in for a new ramp for his porch, and for the first time in years, people started stopping by. They all wanted to see the dog who'd crossed a blizzard to save his master. Frank didn't care about the fuss. What mattered was the porch, and the sunsets, and the weight of Charlie's head against his knee. He did one thing, though something that had been on his mind since that night in the hospital. He sat down at his old typewriter, dusted it off, and started to type. To the staff at Golden Heart Rescue Shelter, it began. He told them everything about the accident, the storm, Charlie's run through the snow, how the old dog he'd adopted a decade ago had returned the favor and saved his life. "I don't know if dogs understand gratitude," he wrote, "but I know loyalty when I see it, and I owe my life to him. Thank you for saving me twice. First by letting me take him home, and again when he wouldn't let me die alone in a barn." He signed it, folded the letter, and mailed it. It made its way onto the shelter's Facebook page a week later. Then the local paper picked it up. Then the news station out of Billings. Soon, people from across the country were writing in, sending cards, photos of their own rescued dogs, even little care packages addressed to Frank and Charlie, Montana. A reporter called and asked if he'd do an interview. Frank just chuckled. "I didn't do anything," he said. "Charlie's the hero." Spring came slow, as it always did in Montana. The snow melted, the ground softened, and the fields turned green again. Frank still walked with a cane, but he got around okay. The porch became his sanctuary once more, and every evening, like clockwork, he and Charlie would sit out there. The wind would rustle the dry grass. The sky would turn gold and purple, and Frank would reach down to run his fingers through Charlie's fur. "Look at that," he'd say, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Another day, Charlie, the old dog, would sigh and rest his head on Frank's leg. "You saved me, you know," Frank would whisper sometimes, not just meaning the barn, not just meaning the cold. Because the truth was, Charlie had saved him 1,000 times before that. On long nights after his wife passed, on birthdays when the phone didn't ring, on those slow, aching mornings when the world felt like it had moved on without him. Charlie had always been there. Maybe humans rescued dogs, sure, but sometimes it was the other way around. One summer afternoon, a family driving through Montana stopped by. They'd read the story and wanted to meet Frank. They had 2 little kids and a mutt they'd just adopted. They brought lemonade and sat on the porch a while, listening to Frank talk about the ranch, the horses, and life in the cause. Before they left, the father looked out at the sunset and said, "This place, it feels peaceful." Frank nodded. "It is, especially when you've got good company." The man smiled. "Charlie's still doing okay?" Frank looked down. Charlie was snoring gently, sprawled out in the shade beside the rocking chair. "He's got some miles on him," Frank said with a grin. "But he's not going anywhere just yet." As the family drove off, Frank settled back into his chair, watching the dust trail fade in the distance. "Come on, Charlie," he murmured. "Let's watch this one together." The golden retriever stirred, lifted his head, and pressed close. And so, man and dog sat side by side, 2 old souls who had found in each other something rare, something steady. Not just survival, not just love, but a friendship that, in its quiet, loyal way, had saved them both. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.